All right. Here we are with John Talaga, who, man, when did we meet, John? Probably like 6 months ago at the last Leaders Forum. Is that
About
the
six.
first time we met?
That was the first time we met.
All
Yep.
right. Yeah. And super impressive guy. Let me tell you a little bit about John, background. I'll just do the highlights because there's so much. I had to like skinny it down,
Yeah. Well,
get down to a few things.
Ben.
That's right. So you were at HealthCom, and you were kind of like one of the co-founders there, I think, and
Co-founder.
then
Yep.
and that got bought by Relay Health. Well, now Relay Health, McKesson at the time.
That's
And
right.
you were at Relay Health for a while, so you were kind of making things happen there. And then it was a company called Doxo. Is Doxo still around?
They are, yeah. They're a payments company, payment network.
Yeah.
Doing pretty well.
Cool. So Doxo, and then in May 2014, you co-founded OnPlan,
Right.
which is how we met. I actually met OnPlan through Lori Whedon at Munson.
That's right.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, these guys are awesome. You should talk to them. I'm like, really? So
Yeah, she's been a
yeah,
great.
so that's how we met. I met Patrick through there, and yeah, so it sounds like you've kind of history of kind of entrepreneurship, right? Like doing some different things. I figured I'd tell a quick story. I always like to tell stories in these to kind of kick us off. So starting Leaders Forum, basically, like, and this would be kind of a question toward to you, like, eventually, once I get the story done, is I'm always fascinated to see how people like figure out, like, oh, I'm going to start something, like, because not everyone can do it or should do it. And I'm not sure I should either, but I did. So, so it's one of those deals, So starting kind of thinking about Leaders Forum about a year into kind of me being out of leaving my last company and kind of being independent. I had always been, I did a lot of sales my last several years of like consulting services, which is, by the way, the worst thing to sell in history to people. Because you actually basically convince them that like there's a problem, right? Which is tough to do. Anyways, so long story, I kind of like went to all these conferences, like none of it was like good. Anyways, I was like, just kept having conversations about, here's my idea, here's what I want to do. And then my wife, she sits me down, we're talking about this, and she's like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, why don't you just do it? This is November of like 17. I was like, I don't know. I guess nothing. Like, it could not work,
I can think of 10 worse things, but
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I was, kind of naive. I'm like, I guess it wouldn't be that, bad, whatever. So then I was like, I guess we'll just do this. Like an insane person, right? No, this kind of business doesn't take a lot of capital, so it doesn't require me to like shell out, get private equity or anything and shell out millions of dollars or anything. But I'm curious to know, kind of like, I'm always fascinated by people's tipping points to when they're like, oh, I'm going to go do this, or we're going to leave this and go into this season. I always call it like, I always try to be cognizant of like, is there wind behind it? Is there something behind it? It's like, oh, I feel like doors are opening and kind of wind behind it. So I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
Well, yeah. So with the businesses that I've been involved with, it first of all, it's always with people, that bring different skill sets. So it isn't just one guy, me thinking, gee, should I do this? As much as it is a very collaborative effort. I feel like I need that, and certainly on the technical side, from a CTO perspective, which is why I started OnPlan with David King, who is a very accomplished CTO and entrepreneur. But so in all the cases, though, it's really been about kind of understanding the market problem and pain, and sort of not chasing it, but really validating it. Like, hey, this seems like a really big problem. We can solve this way. And, is this something that we think is going to, like you say, have wind behind it, that we can get behind? And the main thing is that it's never going to, you can never look at it, at least we've never looked at it as this is the one thing we're going to do. It's really the one thing we're going to start with that can give us, great traction in the market. Right. So it's always been a good formula because we validate with customers. We never would we just go out and say, seems like a good idea to us and talk to PE guys and then go do it. We got to go to the market, like, and go to the, in our case, hospitals and providers, because they know, I've always said they know what the problems are. And a lot of times they know how to solve it. They just don't have, the means to be able to do that in many cases, either the resources, the technology, or a partner. So we've really been, in all cases, kind of, fill that gap. I mean, in the case of OnPlan, just to give you a quick example for context, it was the high deductible, Obamacare Affordable Care Act. And when we looked at the way companies were, we heard from our customers, our colleagues, that nobody was really solving this problem, right? It used to be in the old HealthCom days, it was like we needed to have a patient-friendly bill, and we needed to have a convenient way to pay it.
Right.
While that still exists, you have to have a patient-friendly bill and a convenient way to pay it. The new problem is, but what happens when I can't afford it? And there was financing options that were kind of percolating up. There were payment plans being set up by hospitals that, they would do it by phone and just negotiate plans with patients. But nobody was really solving their problem of, I don't have enough resources to do this. I don't know which patients need payment plans. I don't know, what our guidelines and our limitations, would be for allowing that. And I've got to create discipline around my team. So we looked at that and said, there's absolutely a solution around that. In fact, David King, who is my co-founder, had really solved that problem in higher education, where they had a very similar problem with students that couldn't afford their tuition.
Right.
And they created, essentially an automated payment plan that had guideline segmentation around what they needed. They had guidelines around what the university would accept. They allowed self-activation completely with the patient, so no phone calls, completely hands-free. And that was sort of the starting point of our business, is we can solve that one problem and do it in such a way that it's been proven in a similar industry. Really, education has a lot of similarities to healthcare in terms of payment and billing.
Right.
And bring that to a few customers that said, hey, we're willing to implement this, and let's try it. So, and then you iterate from there. So it's always sort of, MVP, you talk about minimal viable product of what is solving a problem, and then you kind of iterate and expand from there. And that's what's worked for us anyway.
Yeah. It sounds like a little bit like, remember we talked about clouds and dirt. It sounds like you had the kind of cloud, right? You had the, this is what we think what it is, but it does sound like you dug in, like finding out everything you can about whatever the issue is. I mean,
it's a great point. Like, I love that what you did at the last forum with the clouds and dirt, because it so spoke to me. As a matter of fact, I took that and I sent the book, to several people, and I was like, this is exactly what we do, right? And one of the things even today is what makes us, I think, what makes our team so engaged and valuable is them diving into the weeds. But knowing when you come out with all this shrapnel, from the weeds, it's like, what do we do with it? So then you've got to figure out what your priorities are, and customers help you decide those as well.
Right. Yeah, I think it feels like a lot of startup entrepreneurs get lost in the, I was just talking to this guy the other day, and I've talked to several of these where it's like, they have oh, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to solve this problem. And when I ask them, it's like, well, what's the, we're going to bring RPA we're going to bring automation to revenue cycle. I'm like, oh, that sounds great. Like what, what specifically are you going to do? What problem are you solving?
Right.
And they really, it's like, oh, well, just, we're going to solve all these problems. And I was like, all the redundancies, all these administrative tasks. I think it's something like that. I was like, I'm not, that's a great idea. It doesn't sound like you know enough about digging in to figure out that's really, what are you really solving? Because that would seem like the biggest, lots of people have big ideas. As you know, the complexity is really hard.
Well, I think in healthcare in particular, and this is where one of those similarities between, because our OnPlan is multi-vertical, right? We serve education, higher education, and we serve healthcare. And then now we'll talk about, being part of FlyWire. That was what FlyWire served as well, as education and healthcare. But they have a lot of similarities in the sense that, you know, from a healthcare perspective, you know, they're not going, you know, it's hard for a hospital, revenue cycle in particular, to agree to big things, right? Hey, let's change the entire process. Let's change, you know, let's take all these vendors out and let's move this, or let's change my chart. Like, it's really hard for them to make decisions like that.
Right.
We got to, you know, we always look at it as we've got to solve, you know, problems more strategically and more surgically, where it's like, hey, can you solve this one problem for me without me having to change a lot? So we made everything very modular. Now it's all integrated and you can buy the whole package for us, you know, and I think that's important. But I think it's, you know, I think it's really hard for startups to get traction when they're trying to be new and then change the world, you know, at a hospital in particular, because that's a hard decision for them to make.
Right. Yeah, I argued that Epic is like the antithesis of this, right? That an Epic implementation basically just ruins all your processes, right? So like, just takes over. You know, it's big. And I get what they're trying to do. It's not really their fault. It's just, you're right. Like having a micro, we're gonna solve this. We can solve this one issue without having to like redo everything, every one of your processes, and undo everything.
Right.
I mean, I think that's huge because the ability for them to do that is probably significantly higher.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Cost of entry. Interesting. So I'm curious to know, so you went through, I don't know if we want to call it a sale or an acquisition, if you will, whatever you want to call it. And we don't know the details, but so January of 18, it sounds like you know, FlyWire kind of, you guys merged with FlyWire kind of bought. Talk a little bit about that and like, what is it like now to kind of be a CEO within, you know, an entrepreneur within a large organization? Because it's happened to you twice. You don't have to use, please don't throw FlyWire under the bus. But what, you know, like, tell me a little bit about that and what it feels like, the mentality shift for you. I'm curious.
Yeah, certainly, you know, FlyWire and McKesson are two completely different animals. You know,
yes.
And I won't throw McKesson under the bus either, but you're selling out to McKesson, right? You're selling to, and one of the things that made McKesson interesting to stay around was Relay Health. You know, Jim Bodenbender, actually, who is a founding board member on our company at OnPlan, was very entrepreneurial. He's an entrepreneur, and that's why they brought him in to form Relay Health.
Right.
And, it was a great place to be at that time. But you were selling out, and make no mistake, because it's McKesson, right? And there wasn't an opportunity to kind of grow from there, at least from an equity perspective. With FlyWire, we were not at all looking for a transaction like we ended up doing. What we were doing is we were in the process of raising some capital. We had closed some, you know, really large customers. So we were, you know, just getting ahead of the scale.
Right.
So we were in a good position because, you know, we didn't have to raise money. And so FlyWire, we had integrated with them at some common customers. So their whole business is cross-border payments, where they manage tourism, you know, patients coming in from out of the country, and they want to pay with their local currency. That's not an easy thing for them to do. They have to, you know, do a wire transfer. They bring cash. I mean, it's just kind of an ugly situation. So they've done phenomenal on the education side and the healthcare side of managing that problem. So again, sort of that niche solution. And what we had done is we had integrated with them at a few customers that allowed any patient, whether they're international or they're domestic, to be able to go to one place to make a payment. And it worked really well. It was a great experience for those, you know, hospitals that have large international patient representation. And a lot of hospitals are trying to get that volume too. So that's kind of a future thing coming, is they're trying to get that. But so what happened was they knew that we were raising money. They said, hey, we might, you know, be willing to throw some money in. And we said, great, you know, be part of it.
Throw some money.
No problem.
Yeah.
We got this much raised. And so one thing led to another. And as we got talking deeper, I mean, they're backed, you know, FlyWire is backed by Bain Venture Capital. They're backed by Spark and Fidelity and now Temasek. So what one thing led to another was, hey, we're not going to try to play VC here. You know, we would look at an acquisition. and do a merger, because big strategy for FlyWire is to get into and manage all the payments around domestic as well as international, not just the cross-border. So this was an opportunity for them to, and they did a lot of research to get what they felt was the best domestic solution for both healthcare as well as education, and be able to offer that out, to the market. So it was an acquisition, to be clear, but the merge part was that all of us as entrepreneurs, and kind of learning a little bit from previous, is we have a really big stake in FlyWire going forward. So, and they're still somewhat of a startup too. I mean, I can really call them more of a mid-stage company because of where they're at.
Right.
They're just on the Forbes list of the next, billion-dollar valuation company. So they're kind of out of that startup phase. But they're
definitely when you hit $1 billion, you're out of the startup phase.
That's what I would say. That's
valuation. A few $100 million,
Yeah, exactly. So little, completely beyond what we're used to. But that's really what kind of made it appealing, was we can, we wouldn't have the raise money issues anymore. We'll have more capital than we need, to be able to go and grow and invest. But we also are part of a larger organization that really has the same mentality of they're still in that startup, culture, where they're looking to grow, looking to get into new countries and things like that. But so we're managing completely the domestic side, and we're integrating it now with the international side. But we're able to take our business forward. We're able to contribute to the larger whole of FlyWire, and it's been just a great marriage for sure.
I mean, do you think it's like weird having a boss now? Like, like you go from I've been independent for a couple of years, and I think going back to like a job where someone's telling that just feels like that's a little strange. You've been CEO for a few years. How that must be a little strange.
Well, you always have a boss.
Yeah, it's true. You always have your board. And,
it's either your co-founder or that you
true.
to each other, and it's your board. So, I mean, you've always got somebody you're reporting to. And I think the main thing that we had to kind of, so I'll be honest, I'll be completely honest. It's like, you don't really know until it's done, right? Until you're in it. But right. That's the sort of, I'm going to take a leap of faith here.
Yeah.
But we felt really, really confident with the executive team at FlyWire. We spent a lot of time with them. The CEO, Mike Massaro, it's a great guy, and we felt really comfortable with him. So you have to feel comfortable first and trust your instincts. And it worked, right? And afterwards, it was like, okay, now let's see how this really works. But it's really like reporting up to your board. And I have board, the actual FlyWire board access, where we spend a lot of time with them because I run the healthcare, side of the business.
Yeah, right.
So it still feels very much entrepreneurial. I don't feel like I, have a, the traditional boss like you're describing, because I know what that.
Yeah.
I have it in McKesson. It's hard to do. But yeah, no, it's been really good. We got lucky. I think you try to put yourself in a position to be lucky, and we did. So.
Yeah, that's good. So tell me a little bit about what how would you characterize being kind of a CEO and kind of healthcare revenue cycle vendors these days? What do you think kind of the main challenges are today for people in your shoes?
Yeah, so it's moving fast, right? Especially in our market. So if you look at the market we were in with HealthCom, it moved incredibly slow at that time. For somebody to replicate what you were doing they didn't have the resources. We were co-locating servers, and we were
right.
Yeah, and the development resources weren't there, and just to make changes and spin up a business took time. Whereas now you see companies coming in that just have an idea, like you said, on paper, and they've got some investment behind them,
right.
So they make themselves look like, hey, we've been in this forever. So I think that's one of the challenges is kind of battling the noise. There's a lot of noise, and it's not just for the businesses in it, but it's the providers, that people are marketing to. It's confusing to them. So, to boil it down and make sure that you're serving them as a resource, and being able to bring the credibility, because it's not just my credibility in terms of the team, it's the whole team that we have, which we've worked with in the past in other businesses. So we have a ton of experience, but how do you get that across to customers that matters, is one of the big challenges. So there's marketing challenges. I think from a growth perspective, especially early on, there's always capital challenges. We were fortunate enough to be able to fund it ourselves in the beginning, and we had so the first employees that we brought in, and they also were able to add some dollars to the pool. So we were able to self-fund it for the very beginning, which always is helpful because you want to kind of get your bearings and get your footing before you start bringing in outside investment. And then the way we kind of were able to sort of navigate around that was David and I, and Jeff Porter. Jeff Porter was also one of our co-founders. We brought in a board, but it wasn't a formal board. It was more advisory board of just Jim Bodenbender and some others that we had known in the past that were really strong. So they were able to give us some good guidance as we grew and became, we had to more formalize the board and things like that. So I think getting help beyond just the founders is really important, whether it's team, experienced team and board is critical. But those are the challenges. It's scale. It's growing fast enough. Some marketing with the noise, I think, are some of the biggest challenges that are out there for sure.
Yeah. I've heard of a fair amount of groups that have had, either private equity or an acquisition or some kind of investment from an outside healthcare.
Right.
And so they have like these expectations that you're going to be able to do a sale and, with the hospital like for, 2 months, or like, how come you haven't sold them yet? And so a number of my, people I consider friends would be kind of like let go because of those expectations. I wonder if how have you communicated to FlyWire, like, hey, things don't, now they're in education, so maybe it's relatively similar, but I'm just curious on that front.
Well, yeah, you know what, Ben, so that is probably another challenge, right? That you just brought up, because when I stopped saying that, you brought that up. I was like, that would have been the other one, because you see that a lot, and even with some of the other companies that we compete against, is they bring in all this money, and Pat Hayes. So Patrick Hayes was the first CEO of Sutter in 1980. He was the founding CEO. He was 5 years on Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, and he was a board member of ours at HealthCom. I'll never forget, and I've kept in touch with him, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, the market is littered with companies with false expectations in healthcare. And it's true, because if you're not setting the right expectations in terms of, how fast you're going to be able to move and what you're going to be able to do it, you're going to be in trouble, because those expectations are going to force bad decisions. It's going to force short-term thinking, which is not really what you're going to get to, and raise more money and you get diluted. So yeah, that is a big challenge. Now, in our case, it isn't. We're now part of FlyWire, so we're really on FlyWire's schedule, and which means that we're together in terms of making those decisions as to what an exit may be someday. But our focus is, and I've always said this with any of our business, we weren't looking for this acquisition with FlyWire. It just kind of it happened. We got lucky, right? It was just a perfect timing and situation.
Yeah, it was the right fit. Right.
But like the same thing, it's like, hey, go create a great business that serves customers that love you and you make money, and the rest is going to take care of itself. I mean, you don't, I think you don't have to have, we're going to exit here, we're going to exit this way. You got to have, ideas of that. But I think if that's your sole focus, then, I don't think that's going to be a good recipe for success.
Yeah, very, very difficult. Well, John, appreciate the time. This has been great. I'll ask you just one plug. I ask everybody, because you haven't watched my videos yet, so you have to go back and watch them.
I'm going to watch them all now.
Now you got to watch them all. So tell me a little about, you went to Leaders Forum in November. Tell me kind of like what, if you're another vendor or leader, what would you say to them? Yeah.
And matter of fact, we talked off air about this exact same thing a few minutes ago. It's like, when I first went there, we decided to do it, Patrick Viginius, who he said, "Hey, we should do this thing." Had a ton of respect for you, and I was a little skeptical, right? I'm like, yeah, another conference, this thing, and it seems good. It's some money, and yeah, I guess we'll try it. And it took me probably the first hour and a half when I first started, where I was, kind of like this a little bit. And then I was completely sold, right? And the biggest difference, I think, with the forum is that it is, you're sort of delivering on what you're promising, which is it's very collegial. You don't have vendors there trying to sell, the hospitals on stuff. You don't have the hospitals. I mean, everyone opens up. And I felt like you got to know everybody very well, and beyond just what specifically they do, but on issues that everyone was dealing with, even if they're not in the middle of that. And that's what really made it, exciting for me, was that of how much that opened up everything. And I loved it. And we're going back in the spring, because, we plan on continuing to participate.
Yeah. Yeah. Your FlyWire people almost got you to Singapore instead, I heard. So
Yeah.
so it's good we move that around. No, fantastic, John. I appreciate the time. It was great. I always appreciate your wisdom of kind of learnings over the years, especially since you've done so much in such a short little time. So that's great. And we'll see you in May.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. We'll see you then.
All right. Sounds good.